This video includes a discussion about two related articles, each dealing with how autonomy, or individual or private choice, needs to be considered in view of the common good or a sense of community. It is helpful to note that the Callahan article that you read, Knowing Good and Doing Good, this Callahan article on private choice and common good, and the Childress and Fletcher article on respect for autonomy were all published in the same edition of the Hastings Center report in 1994. Now, this was at a time of widespread discussion when the Clinton healthcare reform proposal was being discussed, and I've included a link about details of that proposal. We will discuss that more in a few weeks. This unique edition of the Hastings Center report included a series of short articles that allowed bioethicists to explore aspects of how healthcare could and should address respecting an individual's autonomy. These articles also were written as part of a review of the changes in healthcare resulting from the Belmont Report. The Belmont Report was commissioned to give guidance to research scientists and healthcare providers to prevent research atrocities that happened in World War II. And it was this report that first articulated the Big Four ethical principles and stated that these principles must be considered and respected in research with human subjects. Within this context and historical backdrop, Callahan introduces a development of why we are in this situation. Read that to understand the concepts. Individual choice and personal freedom were seen as the highest moral value. Medicine and healthcare were to struggle against nature. That is, they were to conquer disease and death, and conquering disease was the ultimate responsibility of healthcare. Within this context, in healthcare and in society, the concept of an individual's choice became enthroned or worshipped, and it was considered the most important principle and must be respected at all cost. So Callahan, within this context, begins to question if there must be respect for individual choice, what then is the responsibility of the individual to the common good? Realizing that multiple individual decisions and behaviors basically constitute a culture, is the individual required to live his life so that it is a responsible life that does not cause undue burden on the community or society or the common good? Callahan defines and discusses what he calls a communitarian bioethics, a sense of individual responsibility and not only exclusive individual choice, but of a greater social commitment to the moral life. Callahan introduces the need of a balance of communitarian bioethics and that continuing exclusive respect of individual choices may put the common good in danger, and that healthcare providers need to consider cultural influences, especially in view of biomedical changes. Callahan discusses these biomedical changes that were affecting the way we understand ourselves. These are very similar to the biomedical changes that Tong identified that we discussed on the first day. The first one is the extension of the lifespan. We have a greater ability to keep individuals alive, especially during pregnancy and at birth, and at that time a much greater emphasis on prolonging life into old age. The second biomedical change was our increasing ability to control procreation. the timing of pregnancy. That was a new radical development. It altered how we saw the role of women in society and in the family. But another significant biomedical change at that time was the ongoing change in the ratio of young to old in society. The very young and the very old, who were classified as dependents, were outweighing the independents, those between 21 to 65, who were considered active workers and providers. It was causing a reconsideration of how long the active workers could continue to support the age extremes that were significantly increasing in number. But another biomedical change involved how we are able to understand ourselves through psychiatry and then through genetics. Both of these resources offer the individual opportunity to develop great insight, but are very expensive getting to know you tools. Callahan is saying, is society responsible for paying for each individual to get to know himself? And the final biomedical change involves the societal idea of the fixity of human nature. Even Galen argued that the individual was malleable in early life. Now, through medication and behavioral therapy and other self-help movements, society had an increasing belief that human nature is not unalterable and can be fixed, and if so, then it should be fixed. So, if human nature can be fixed, who determines what needs to be fixed and how it will be fixed? Callahan discusses the view of autonomy in terms of behavior in health care. And his position was that autonomy, individual choice, needs to be cultivated or developed into personal responsibility that considers a decision from the perspective of maintaining a balance between the importance of individual choice and individual responsibility and the common good or the community, that neither extreme, only individual choice or only absolute community, was beneficial for society, and that the goal of a mature, well-developed individual was personal responsibility, in which personal judgments are culturally acceptable and beneficial. Callahan then asked what the responsibility of bioethics was to enable this maturity and responsibility, and proposed that bioethics should work to advance awareness of and a commitment to the culture and the community, and that bioethics should inform the individual of options and the importance of accepting societal responsibility, increasing a commitment to making good personal judgments. In support of Callahan's premises, the article by Childress and Fletcher, also published in 1994, were asked to offer opinions and weigh in on this discussion. We have talked about the ongoing tension between autonomy and justice. Remember that Callahan considered respect for autonomy as enthroned. It was seen as enthroned or worship. It was seen as the premier principle to be considered and may not be helpful. Childress and Fletcher seek to say that an individual's autonomy should be respected, but it is not the premier principle. It is not absolute. The primary recommendation is that the sole consideration for the respect of an individual's autonomy cannot and should not be absolute. An individual's right to choose can be overridden under some conditions, and the right to choose requires that the individual be allowed to choose not to receive care and not to offer care. Another consideration was that because there is inherent tension between autonomy and justice, which is basically an allocation of scarce resources, autonomy cannot be considered the absolute overriding principle. Fletcher and Childress and Fletcher also support the idea of a communitarian bioethics in which personal choice can and should be considered in balance with the common good. Childress and Fletcher did introduce two imperatives in balancing respect for individual autonomy. Respecting autonomy is more of an ethical dilemma when the individual is requesting treatment, especially extraordinary care, than when one is refusing treatment. Basically, when an individual says, "No, I do not want that treatment," there are not as many ethical dilemmas as when the individual says, "I want that specific treatment." And respecting that choice and honoring that request for extraordinary care may result in an injustice if that request results in others being denied resources because of a scarcity. And the second imperative in considering respect for autonomy was the fact that respecting an individual's choice at one point in time, does not automatically mean that the choice is valid and can be respected at another point in time. There must be an informed consent signed each time an individual receives care, because choices and preferences change over time. In summary, Childress and Fletcher advocate that individuals involved in bioethical decisions must realize the importance of respecting an individual's autonomy, but they must also consider the force and appropriateness and relevance of the other principles and consider the impact of personal choice on the common good. In essence, healthcare providers must have a broader interpretation of the individual, the context, and the community, and all three should be carefully considered in any bioethical decision. This concludes this video dealing with how Callahan and Childress and Fletcher view individual choice and the community, or the common good.